I'm going to say it all over again. Okay. Hey, everybody. Okay, so this is week 2. This is going to be the medieval church. I'm going over a huge swath, like 50% of the time, which is from 500 to 1500. There's so much information in this era that I've taken out the councils, which, I talked to several of you and others about it. I think it'd be really good if one of the deacons or the priest did a class on 21 councils. It'd be a 4 or 5 week class all by itself. So anyway, but I digress. So this one, I'm going to talk about all of the changes scholastically and everything else. Next week, same era, but I'm going to be going into Christianity, Islam, and the Crusades. Okay, that's a whole class by itself. That could be a whole semester by itself. All of this stuff could just keep going. So I'm trying to get as much information to you guys as possible without boring you to tears. Okay? All right, so the first one, and by the way, I don't have my handouts. I had handouts for every one of the saints, and I had stuff on Charlemagne and stuff like that. They weren't able to print them out, so we'll get your emails and we'll send all of the information to you guys. I'm going to start doing that with Teresa because we did have some people that were online that wanted the information, so I gave her the information and now they can propagate it out. So that's how we're going to do this from now on. How many? 87. Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. My son watched it 86 times. Hey, Mike. Okay. So anyway, we're going to start with 500. So the biggest thing that happened at this point was there was a huge evolution in the papacy, okay? The political atmosphere in Europe started morphing, and the church started morphing with it. The papacy started forming more as a entity or almost as its own government type of a situation. And the Pope was setting everything up. The popes were setting everything up to promote ecclesiastical tradition, the evolution and the belief of the supremacy of Peter and the seat of Rome. I have some verses that explain that. Ephesians, Matthew 16:18. The role of James in the Acts, 2 Corinthians, and Galatians. The evolution of the belief in the papacy in Romans 15, and Galatians 2:8, and Peter 1. But bottom line, as the church, like I said last week, as the church moved forward, things were splitting, but Constantine brought them back together, and then they split again. But the thing was, is they agreed that the seat of Peter was the overall arching. So like I said, when John Paul II passed away, we saw all of the patriarchs coming to his funeral because they recognized the Holy See as the head. So Gregory the Great formalizes the papacy. There was a huge crisis militarily, and Rome was falling. And unfortunately, Rome built some awesome roads, and that was their downfall because they used the roads to come into Rome and take it down. And there was an acute crisis of the barbarians coming down from the north, and it cut the Western church off from the Eastern church. This added to the schism between, because then the Western church was doing things and the Eastern church was doing things, and they weren't concurrent. Uh, it assumed the Pope assumed an emperor-like authority and rules of central Italy with skills and devotion. So people started following the papacy almost as a government. Okay? John the Faster, Bishop of Constantinople, claims the highest authority in church is the universal bishop, and Gregory is acknowledged as the supreme authority of the church. So you still have the patriarch and the pope, but they're taking different thought processes. Now, when we get into, that's why I wanted to say that, I think the priests and or deacons should really go into the councils, because the councils started straightening a lot of this stuff out. That's what the councils were all about. Okay?
Question?
Sure.
Was there an exact period of time when they started calling the Pope?
I think they started calling, I thought it was way before. Almost at the beginning. Okay? Correct. So they became patriarchs. So the question was, or what Mike said was, that there were four, but then there was one that was the head, and they said, what was the words exactly again? First among equals. So that's the Bishop of Rome, right? Which the Pope still is, right? He's an equal, but he is the first. Okay? The Pope also promoted evangelism and pastoral care, so they actually started working on diocesan formation more over that time, and everything started to get more formalized all the way through the entire church. They really started promoting theology, and as we go into some of the saints like Thomas Aquinas at this time, all of them started promoting, and I wish I had the handouts, but Thomas Aquinas was very involved in identifying what went on with the Trinity and what went on with all kinds of different things and our thought processes and the theology behind all of that. They were highly influential, Gregory was a highly influential prototypical pope. He was the father of the new era of medieval church history. He was the one who started the Gregorian chants, the Greg chants, okay? The other thing that started building in the church was monasticism. Now, monasteries existed all the way back to Anthony in Egypt, but now they're starting to formalize them more and more, and there are men who become saints, like Benedict and St. Francis and those people who started their own orders and their own monasteries, okay? It existed to preserve both the spirit of Christianity and the ancient wisdom of civilizations. Now, back in that time, we didn't have a printing press yet. So the monasteries acted as the place to reside all of the works. They would write the Bibles, and they would basically preserve all of the history of the faith. On top of that, they had a life of prayer and community, and because of this, they were very devoted people, and they got into rhetoric and theology, and they got into debates about thoughts, and this is how people like St. Francis and Benedict and all of them debated these issues and built on the theology. And as I said, the first monasteries were founded by St. Anthony of Egypt in 285, but now we're getting into the 500s, so about 200 years later, and they're formalizing these. And please, if you have anything to add, jump in, because it was great last week. So the growth of monasticism response to the tumultuous times. So you had a lot of poverty and everything else going on. This is the Dark Ages, and we'll go into why they were the Dark Ages in a bit. But because of the barbers coming down and attacking, and now you have towns being burned and everything else, you had the wealthy who, if they wanted to move up in society, they would have either their eldest daughter or their eldest son join a monastery or a convent to be able to build on their family's stature. And on top of that, that was the only place that they could learn to be able to read and write and stuff like that formally. So you would always want, if you had the ability to, you would always want one of your offspring to be able to go into holy orders, because then your family could increase in society as well as their knowledge and ability to move forward, your family to move forward. Now, Benedict of Nursia, he created a monastic order, and the monks became guardians of Latin learning. They became the evangelists. They became the managers of the land tracts in the area of the monastery. They became advisors to the king. They became military recruiters. So you see where it's getting very governmental and political, okay? They were synthesizers of classical Christian Germanic influences. Remember, now we have the barbers who came down, so now you have that Germanic, basically pagan stuff going in. So they synthesized the classical Christian Germanic influences. Now, St. Benedict is most important figure in monasticism at the time. He built a monastery at Monte Cassino in Italy. Now, I'm into military history. There's a couple cool things about Monte Cassino. One of them is one of the monks at Monte Cassino invented the roulette wheel, and he went insane trying to figure it out. Okay, that's one thing. That's where the word casino comes from with casinos, okay? And then the other thing is that at Monte Cassino, if you know anything about World War II, that was one of the most horrendous battles in World War II on the Italian peninsula. We had almost 80% casualties at Monte Cassino, the Americans. It was terrible. The Nazis held that, and we just fought to the death until we got it back. Well, but they still held on to it, even though we bombed the bejesus out of it. Yeah, right. But anyway, back to St. Benedict. His rules became the standard for monastic life for centuries. And in the 9th century, or the 800s, monasticism became the centers of learning, and their abbots were powerful men. So it just kept building and building over the centuries, where they became more powerful, and these monasteries became huge things. So like we're going to get into like how England started influencing the church prior to the break-off of Henry VIII. But I've been to some of the abbots there, and they're incredible. I mean, they were all razed to the ground by Henry VIII, but all of the walls are still there and everything, and it's just incredible what these things were, and then they basically controlled all of the land around it, okay? Know that cross. So the Franciscan friars were founded by St. Francis of Assisi between, he was from 1182 to 1226. Sneaking in. The Franciscan friars evangelized, preached, sang, and begged through Western Europe. One of the biggest things about the Franciscans was they never worried about food, they never worried about anything. they basically stated similar. St. Francis said that if the birds of the air and the animals of the field don't have to worry about food, why should we? So they always took that thought process, and that's why they were basically, I wouldn't consider it begging, but they always assumed that people would give them their sustenance. Okay? So they were characterized by emotionalism, aestheticism, and disciplined piety. And one thing that I really love about our friars is they're the most positive part of what you would call pious. I really love the way they truly think about everything. I've just always liked everything about what they do in this church. So if you look at Europe in 600 AD, it's a mess like it was then and is now. It was broke up into all of these chunks, and if you look at Ireland and England, I mean, there was just little kingdoms everywhere. Same here. You got Alemannia here, and this is Austria. Where's Italy? Italy's so small. But I mean, honestly, Italy hasn't ever been Italy until Mussolini. I mean, it was always broke up into pieces. But you look at all of these different kingdoms, and it was pretty broken apart. And up until the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, it was broke apart even to the point where you would have a king over here and a knight over here, and you were Catholic and he was Protestant, and you were right next to each other. And when the war broke out, I mean, you had next door neighbors killing each other. Okay? So the rise of England's influence on the Western Church. So we're going to get these saint packets out to you, but these saints had huge influence on the changing of the church. Augustine of Kent, the merger of the Irish Celtic and Benedictine Roman Christianities, and the monasteries started forming all over, and they started continuing to propagate all around. Venerable Bede, Saint Bede, Northumbria was in decline by the time of Bede's death, and if I show you where Umbria was, I think it's up in this area over here. But these areas were very, all of England and Ireland were very Catholic, all Catholic. There was still a lot of Druid things going on and paganism, but in general, when the Romans came in there, the Romans actually came in right around here, and then the Vikings came in around here, so you had influences of them. But when Patrick and all of the others came in during the Roman conquest, they started moving Christianity into England, and then England started controlling what was going on with the church on the whole continent. By the 700s, the epicenter of Christian culture shifts from England back to the Frankish Empire. So at that point, Charlemagne came into power. Charlemagne was from around the area of Belgium, around Aachen in Germany, or up in that area, that general vicinity. It's kind of like on the Belgian-German Holland border. Okay? And Charlemagne was a great warrior, and his rule epitomized the synthesis of classical culture. He was very much Orthodox Christianity, but he was also a Germanic barbarian. So he didn't take any garbage, but he was forcing his hand with the Christian church. The Roman Empire, the marketplaces and cities still existed, but the Roman Empire was in complete collapse at this point, okay? And the Western Roman Empire was mostly just farmland, agrarian culture. There was tons of monasteries, and there were cathedral churches all in the west, in that area in here, the Kingdom of Nuestria. That's where he was from, probably around here. But that whole kingdom, it was just loaded with agrarian, and cathedrals and monasteries. He was a conquering warrior. He basically conquered the majority. I mean, he was like Napoleon. He conquered the majority of Europe at that time, okay? And because of that, he was in league with Pope Leo, and Pope Leo crowned Charlemagne the emperor of all the Romans. So the whole Roman Empire, which then becomes the Holy Roman Empire. Okay? Like I said, if we went into real heavy detail on Charlemagne, we could do days just on Charlemagne. His reign becomes called the Carolingian Renaissance. And I'm not sure why I had Louis the Pious on there. I didn't get into him. Yeah, there you go. He played cards on Friday night with them. There you go. So now we go into the high medieval era, which is 1000 to 1300. The reason why it's called the High Middle Ages is at this point you had all of the monasteries and you had the whole structure of people going into the monasteries and into the convents, and they were now, the families were starting to rise up in society, and that's why they called it the High Middle Ages. The West emerges as the primary theater of Christendom. There are three areas. The Asian Christianity, which when you saw the map last week, Asia isn't Asia like China. Asia is like around Turkey. Okay, that's considered Asia. Okay, the Byzantine Church, which is around actually Asia's a little further south, but the Byzantine Church is around Turkey and Greece. And then you have the Western Church. Now the split that I showed you on the map before never really changes all the way through the history of the church, all the way to today, okay? In 1054, there was a great schism. It was a division between the two distinct churches, the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox. There has been attempts to reconcile this ever since, okay, for 1,000 years. And the only time we actually had it unify was for a very brief period during Constantine. But other than that, it's always been split. And it goes right back down into the Roman lines of which we've seen all along. Here it is again, okay? You split the church right down the middle. And then you have the Eastern Orthodox, and then you have the Western Church. You have the Coptic Orthodox down here. They became more and more separated by theology and politics, and that all started when the now it was already split, but it got worse when the barbarians came down and broke them apart where they couldn't get to each other. And when that happened, and they came down and broke off all of the trade routes. I mean, we talked about that in the class before. All of the trade routes to move everything came this way. Well, when the barbarians came down and blocked that, there was no way to get back and forth unless by boat. But obviously that isn't the quickest way. And Eastern Empire often resented the Romans' claim to primacy. once it really split during the schism. So this is a slide that I had of a pope in the 1950s. And but basically, the Western Church, Rome is the seat of the church. The Eastern Church considers Constantinople is the seat of the church. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome, elected by clergy, the highest authority, and he is spiritual and temporal. The Patriarch is the head of the church, appointed by the emperor, and the emperor is the most influential. Christians in the West recognize the supreme authority of the Pope. Christians in the East recognize the Patriarch of Constantinople. One language is Latin, the other language is Greek. So the characteristic of the age is on both sides of the church, both the Eastern and the Western church, was that schools and universities popped up, religious universities, and they began teaching even more fervently as many as they could. And this was the only place that you could actually get a true education. Okay? So if you had the money, go ahead.
When are you going to go back then and take this whole thing and insert Muhammad?
Next week.
You're already 300 years behind.
Yeah. I could have split this into all kinds. Next week is Muhammad, Islam, Christianity, and the Crusades.
It's not going to be repetitive.
Some might be, but the reason why I'm going through the scholastic stuff, Mike, at this point, is that it's an important part of the role of how everything happened, but I could go into the councils that happened, I could go into Islam and how it affected the church, which we'll do next week. I could go into 5 different areas. So anyway, we had the cathedrals, schools, and universities popping up all over. Has anybody been to this one? Do you know which one this is? It's the rear view of it. This is Notre Dame. The flying buttresses on the back. This is actually taken from the Seine. This is Cologne Cathedral, I believe. Now in this cathedral, they have the relics of the 3 wise men. They actually built it for. They've never finished this. It took them 500 years to finish it. And then as soon as they finished it, they started putting scaffolding on the other side, and there's never not been scaffolding on it the entire time of its existence. Well, you can see why. Look at all of it. I mean, it's incredible. So the church, the biggest thing was scholasticism at this point in this section that I'm talking about. The biggest thing was the scholastic method to actually teach in a certain format and how to teach people. Their goal was to convert as many people and to get those people to convert as many people. So that was the impetus. They incorporated Aristotle and Socrates into the teachings. So now I'm going to have papers on all of these guys. I went into the Catholic Online like I did last week, and I have, this one's like 40 pages. Thomas Aquinas was incredible. He wrote so many things about our thoughts, and if anybody wants to chime in, but Anselm of Canterbury, Peter Albard, Peter Lombard, John of Salisbury, Albertus Magnus the Great, Thomas Aquinas. One of his greatest works was Summa Theologica, but he had thoughts on what topics. I mean, go into any of them. Yeah, who is God? what is the Trinity? Let's define the Trinity. He talked about purgatory too, right? I mean, he talked about everything. Yeah. Yeah. What is sin? Everything. I mean, yeah. He just had so many writings.
He was in the era, like you said, it was Aristotelian, Aristotle teachings, and it was a lot of his stuff was an answer to the way that they were teaching Aristotelian theology or philosophy at the time. So he adopted Aristotelian philosophy and incorporated that into theology. And if you read the Summa, I'm going to make you guys read the Summa. He refers to two characters more than anybody else. The apostle and the philosopher, talking about Paul and Aristotle. And so he's trying to incorporate
The
those
two of them.
two disciplines, right? The theology of Paul and the philosophy of Aristotle. Because Aristotle wasn't so far from knowing, I mean, he believed in the afterlife and those sorts of things. So he's trying to bring them both together because of the prevailing teaching of the time is Aristotelian.
Yep.
I read the Summa probably 25 years ago. It was a whole other way. You have to learn how to read it first, then you can read it.
Yeah.
Why when you read it? 6.
You believe that, you'll buy this watch. Okay. So there's a painting of him. So I usually have this slide when I have all of the confirmandi, but basically, so I usually open it up to the floor. How did scholasticism influence the church? I mean, you just brought up one. Anybody else got any other ideas as to what you think it did for the church? I usually get that from the confirmandi, not the deacons. Well, it's all right. I mean, we can open it up, but my biggest thing, I think, it enhanced people's thoughts and beliefs on their own spirituality. I think it also brought up more and more people to, once they believed certain things, like what Thomas Aquinas and others said, that it inspired them to go out and evangelize, and it just increased the church even more. I brought it up last week. Every time there's a negative thing that ends up happening in the church, like the Dark Ages, where they start suppressing thought, what ends up happening is you get this upswell of rebellious people that end up becoming saints, and they start building on thought, right? And that's what's happened multiple times during the history of the church. And I think scholasticism, I think, and we'll talk about it next week, about Islam trying to attack the lands and the church and the faithful. I think that started spawning people to resist and expand the church more. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I think scholasticism, as well as what we're going to talk about next week, how it influenced the church. So now, late medieval era. So in the late medieval era, there was a ton of social upheaval. What happened was, to the same thing about all of these folks who were learning and going to the monasteries and the convents and everything else, there was a lot of upheaval in the lower classes because they didn't have the ability to do that. Very similar, it happens over and over again in history. It's like, hey, those are the haves and we're the have-nots. So that started happening, as well as the fact that you had wars between all of these different entities in Europe. You had a lot of questioning about teachings, a lot of questioning about just what was going on with the powerful. There was a decline in the church's power because of this. There was a passion for knowledge because it was being subverted. That's why they call this the Dark Ages. So you have a situation where they say the sun revolves around the earth. And somebody says, no, I've calculated it out. That isn't what's happening. You're a heretic. And up until, when did they allow Galileo to actually not be a heretic? They finally, it was recently, in our lifetime.
But, Copernicus had a definition beforehand. He was in good with the church. And Galileo's problem was he was a jerk to the Pope.
Well, yeah, and the fact that he was chopping up bodies and drawing them.
Right. But
Yeah.
Copernicus predated Galileo, and the church did not call him a heretic, even though he provided the same science.
Okay.
Right. So it's not the fact that Galileo.
Well, what was Galileo own? Was it what he was doing with science?
No, it was that he was mocking the church. He had a couple of writings. I can't remember when, but he put these characters in and made. And one of them was called a fool or something like that. It was supposed to be the Pope. So he was just being a jerk to the papacy because they wouldn't take what he said wholesale and not examine it. He was a lot like Luther, where Luther just wanted him to just take what he said immediately and bless it and say it's good. The church, like the church does, say, oh, we'll think about it. And so he got pissed at the church, and that's how it all happened. It wasn't his science. I mean, that's a common misconception that, like I said, Copernicus had the same science before him. Church never saying about that. But it's the way he addressed the church that really did it.
Okay.
He read some of the stuff that Galileo wrote. He was just looking for a fight. He got it. So.
So Galileo was looking for a fight.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but there was a passion for knowledge, and a lot of it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of it the church didn't want to accept. Correct? Okay. Well, it wasn't just one guy that they had a problem with. They didn't just call it the Dark Ages for Galileo.
Right. It wasn't like it was doctrinal that was the center of everything. It was a thought. It wasn't doctrine.
Right.
Right.
But there's lots of thoughts that come from, I mean, we're now getting into a theological thought, but I mean, there's a lot of thoughts that the church brings up that aren't necessarily doctrine, right?
Well, the heliocentricity thing was more a matter of science clashing with theology. And the church said, well, the earth is the center because that's a theological take on it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was at odds with the scientific. And that's what they had to resolve was what the role of science is and what the role of theology is.
Right, and that goes right into this thing about the passion for knowledge and the decline of the church's power. The church was trying to turn around and say, hey, wait a second, we know what it is. And the scientists are going, no, we got another idea, and you should really listen to it. And they went, no way. And that happened in a lot of instances, not just with Galileo. But, I mean, that's what started all of the issues as the church started declining at this point in time. There was a Western papal schism to the point where we actually had, and we'll get into that, but we had 3 areas that claimed to be the Pope, okay? Because of all of this stuff that was going on in the church. So there was also the rise of nationalism. There were continental wars going on all over the place, and there was national pride. So you had the North saying, I know what's best, and by the way, you got some really good food over there, so I'm going to come in and take it. And you had all of these continental wars going on, and the national pride thing too. So So this goes into the Western Papal Schism, which started in 1378. So during the 1300s, the papacy started having all kinds of conflicts within itself, and what we acknowledge as the true papacy moved to Avignon in France. And we had 7 popes in a short amount of time. I mean, that's only 65 years in Avignon. And at the same time, then you have the Roman popes, these 4, from 1378 to 1406. And then you have 1378 to 1423. And 1409 to 1415. And it wasn't coming together. And then there was a great mystic by the name of Catherine of Siena, my mom's namesake. And Catherine is a doctor of the church, and she also was a mystic, and she had visions. And she had a vision. She spent 3 months in Avignon working to realize her dream of unifying the church back together again. She persisted and startled the Pope, Gregory, by telling him that she knew about a private vow Gregory had made before God that if elected Pope, he would return the papacy to Rome. Now, Gregory had never said that to anybody. And she had this vision, and she went up to him, and she told him this, and his mouth dropped open. So finally, humble yet firm saint from Siena convinced him to fulfill his vow, and Gregory made plans to travel back to Rome. And the Holy See has returned to Rome, and the papacy has been in Rome ever since. That's the only time that it was away from Rome. There's a ton of detail there too. I mean, you could spend semesters just on that. But bottom line, there was a lot of fracturing of the church at that point. There's councils that go all around this stuff to get it back together. It wasn't working. And then we have a saint go to Gregory, and then it comes back.
So these popes were competing against one another?
Yeah, there were popes and anti-popes, and yeah.
So it was up to your parish as to which pope you were going to follow, or was it just geographical?
It was more regional. It was more regional. And the thing is that, what is that? Oh, that's an Amber Alert buzzing on my phone. It's the second one in 2 days. Gregory was the last, wasn't that the last time we had, and correct me if I'm wrong, but up until now with Benedict and Francis, that was the last time anything like having 2 popes alive at the same time has happened. Isn't that correct? I think it's been 600 years. I think that is, right? I believe that's it. So the last time we ever had 2 popes alive at the same time was then. So the Renaissance spirit, the spirit of the age, as knowledge grew, fear decreased, fear of the church, fear of the government, lots of things, okay? People didn't care. They felt emboldened. And men thought less of worshiping the unknown and more of overcoming it. Every vital spirit was lifted up with a new confidence. Barriers were broken. There was no bound now to what man might do. So humanism starts creeping in at this point. So the spread of Renaissance humanism starts spreading like wildfire all over Europe. It spreads into the church itself. It spreads throughout Italy, France, England, Germany, and Holland. Bum, bum, bum. So then the spread of the written word. Well, in 1466, Gutenberg in Germany invents the printing press. And because of the Crusades, we have more paper. So now we can print. And so the Crusades opened up the trade routes up on that northern flank of the Mediterranean and allowed paper to arrive from Egypt. It would come across through Sicily, and it would go across the trade routes. And Martin Luther said, printing is God's latest and best work to spread the true religion throughout the world. It's true, but then he does some other stuff. And there is the first printing press. So the Dark Ages of the church, it was basically the total dominance of Christianity across the European theater and the repression of all art, science, and progress that was not Christian in nature. Okay? That was the true definition. The era became known as the Dark Ages, and because of the introduction of theocracy. So, not separation of church and state. Church is the state. And when we get into Islam next week, I was over in Saudi, and it is clearly a theocracy, and you can't have anything but that one religion in that state, period. If you're caught with anything other than that, you're kicked out of the country immediately. So we'll get into that next week.
But what would have been there if it wasn't for the theocracy?
What?
There would have been a void throughout Europe had there not been a theocracy. There would have been no government, no control.
Well, the governments were fighting each other, and they started.
It would have just been a total collapse.
Yeah, and that's what happened in the 1600s. That was the 30 Years' War. And that was with theocracy, both Lutheran, Calvinist, and the Catholics. And they just completely obliterated the continent. I mean,
the theocracy that was unifying.
At least through Italy.
It was unifying them.
At least through Italy.
That's why you got three multiple popes though too, because Avignon they just kept on killing
yeah, they kept killing off the popes. So that,
agreed with the king.
yeah. Oh, you don't agree with me? Whack 'em.
Well, in Italy there was no king. There was pope.
Right, he ran it. Right.
For most of northern Italy, and then most of
But then as soon as you get towards around the 1500s, you have the Habsburgs down in Spain, and they start controlling the Holy Roman Empire. So you've got the seat of power is controlled by the guy who's got the most power. When the wars in the 1600s started, which I would consider the first true world war, you had the Spanish fighting the Dutch. In fact, to this day, even during World War II, there's a line in Holland at a river, and everything to the south is Catholic, and everything to the north is Protestant. And that line was the line that the Nazis couldn't cross because of the Allies too. And you had all of the Protestants. So you have the Habsburgs who came up from the south, and they tried to dominate Europe, and they took control of the Holy Roman Empire at one point in the 1600s. So, I mean, theocracy was there, but how much of it was truly religious theocracy? I mean, you had kings and emperors like Charlemagne who ended up controlling it because of the will of their sword.
Weren't there like 4 or 5 families that's it, all the royals?
Mm-hmm. And that even went into World War I. I mean, they were all cousins. They call it the Cousins' War. I mean, this stuff, it was so inbred at the hierarchical stuff in Europe.
You're 400 years away now, from what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, the families go back. It started with the positivity of the church, where all of these people got their power, and then they kept glomming on to more and more power, and then the church started faltering, and like you said, they started taking out popes. I mean, you really think about it. When we start getting into the modern church, Pope John Paul was the first non-Italian pope for how many hundreds of years? Because, yeah, exactly. They just made sure it stayed in Italy. Okay? So, you know, I mean, when you get into it, this is one of the things that I talk to my son about. You have to differentiate our faith from the government of the church, because the government is an entity just like the government of France, the government of Italy, and in time it has gone and it has become a superpower, and then it's come down and stuff like that. And over time it's changed many times, and it'll change again, because that's human nature. The one thing I learned in my history classes was that mankind has never, ever, ever changed. Human nature never changes. The only thing that changes is tactics and weaponry. That's it. And the lust for power has always been there since the dawn of mankind. No, some of them haven't. I mean, think about it. You had a pike, right? I mean, somebody's sitting there fighting with a pike. Well, what's a pike? A pike is a bayonet. It's the same thing. So, and they just made it better over time. Instead of just having one thing, they have it with 3 blades, so you can't stitch up the wound, you know, stuff like that. So, anyway, I completely digressed in the military, but that's the thing. When you start getting into this, I mean, everybody's dying of famine and pestilence during the Dark Ages. They don't have any food. The church is denying them the ability to have knowledge, because anything that is not Christian is not allowed to be known. Yeah, it was 12th. So it's in this time frame, right around this time frame. The Black Plague was in the Dark Ages, yeah. And that's where we got the term quack, because the doctors had this beak thing that they wore. Yeah. Yeah, now we're doing the same thing. Yeah, we're all quacks. Sacramental system of salvation. So, I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm going to explain some of the stuff that's on this slide, because it was people's interpretation of what was going on at the time, okay? So the sacrament, sign or symbol, sign of grace conveyed to a sinner. The concept of full of grace was considered the treasury of merits. Now we're getting into indulgences, okay? Not that the indulgences aren't good, they're good. But when you start making them a commodity, when you start making them a commodity, that's where things start going haywire. Okay? So, concept of full of grace, treasury of merits, mortal sins and venial sins. So depending on which ones you had different indulgences, right? Obviously, we have the 7 sacraments. We all know those. The reason why punishment is here is because the people considered penance punishment for what they did. Okay? It's not punishment, it's forgiveness, but, okay? And extreme unction or anointing of the sick. Purgatory. We know what it is. It's a state between heaven and hell where punishment is suffered by those, or working off what you did in life before, if you can make it.
It's more of between earth and heaven. Hell, it's only
Yeah.
worse.
So is this where justification takes place? Purgatory?
Sanctification.
Sanctification.
All right. So if you're good enough to get to purgatory, then you have to be sanctified. And the whole thing was indulgences. The length of punishment can be reduced by receiving indulgences from the Pope. Now, the defense for purgatory is 2nd Maccabees, which, interesting enough, when we get into Martin Luther, he gets rid of 7 books. One of them is Maccabees. Maccabees 1 and 2. 2 of them. Matthew and Corinthians. The abuses of indulgences became widespread throughout the church. It became a significant source of income for the church. Now, on top of this, remember, we're going to go into the Crusades next week, but the indulgences were paying for the Crusades in many ways. Yep, and I'm going to bring that up too, yeah. They finished St. Peter's with indulgences, okay? Okay. Then we had this thing that made more people turn away from the church, which was the Spanish Inquisition. Now, this actually went on from 1478 to 1834. That's amazing, 400 years. And the last great innovation of the age of theocracy was the Inquisition, which started out as a measure designed to suppress all non-Christian thought. It was charged with seeking out, trying, and sentencing persons guilty of broadly defined crimes of heresy. So there probably were a lot of heretics that went through this, and they truly were heretics. But there were a lot of people who weren't. And if you were a Jew, you went through this. And Inquisition quite openly used torture. They tortured people really badly to obtain evidence for a wide range of alleged charges, including heresy, witchcraft, and bigamy. So, I mean, they show all kinds of things in this picture about people being hung. I don't know what they're pouring down this guy's throat, but they did all kinds of things to say, you know, repent and believe, and that isn't the way you get it done. And that went on for a long time. So there were a lot of people who were aware of what was going on in Spain, and you got the Dutch fighting the Spanish, okay? And then you got a guy named Calvin that comes out of it. And then you've got the indulgences, which Luther is sitting there saying, this doesn't make sense. I don't have a problem with indulgences. I have a problem that you're selling them and stuff like that. So, indulgences, from the sinner's perspective, the receipt, usually a purchase from the church of absolution in varying degrees from the temporal suffering necessitated by sin. Sin absolved by a priest must receive temporal penalty, and that penalty can be diminished by the application of grace from the treasury of merits. So when we go back to that treasury of merits thing. And how do you get grace? I mean, we all know this was wrong, so I'm just bringing up the historical part of it. Works may include visits to holy places, that'll help you. Repetition of assigned prayers. Rosary started at this point in time. performance of good works, monetary gifts to the church. In some way, a good deed is substituted for a sinful deed or attitude. So that's where you get the buying your way to heaven, buying a stairway to heaven, right? At dawn of Reformation, Pope Leo X revived the Jubilee indulgence, purporting to use all revenues to fight the Turks in the East and help sinners in the West. His actual program was to finish construction on the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome. And here is an actual print of one of those. I don't read Latin very well, but I think this is a form of absolution, I believe. And I don't know if this is wax or somebody's thumbprint. It's probably some wax seal. So that's all I have on my slides. Now I was planning on going through some of the saints. Do you have any of them? Oh, you do? Oh. Oh. Yeah, I mean, it was way too much stuff. Look at, this is as bad as last week. Bad, good, whichever way you want to call it, okay? Front and back, and it's that thick, yeah. But let me go into some of the stuff on some of these saints, because some of the ones that we don't really hear too much about. Okay, so I don't have Augustine of Kent there. Hang on. Yeah, no, I got him. He was a he arrived in the kingdom of Saxons, so the Anglo-Saxons, and he was a missionary, and they were without weapons, and that was pretty dangerous at the time, and they went around baptizing tens of thousands of subjects. The idea of sending Christian missionaries to Britain to convert the Saxon kingdom has originated with Gregory the Great, a few years before he was called to service as the Pope. He had opened to lead the mission for himself, but when this was determined to be impossible, he selected Augustine of Kent and 40 other Italian Benedictine monks for the mission. And Augustine was obviously one of them. So Augustine and his monks arrive in Kent. 10,000 Saxons are baptized on Christmas Day in 597. Augustine attempts but fails to bring the Celtic Church in communion with Rome. And in 660, Celtic and Roman churches are finally united because of him. I'll get all of this stuff to you. Yeah, we'll get everybody's email on there, and then, because, yeah. Yep. And what I usually do on some of these, like with St. Augustine, I also give you, one of the things I love, because I'm into history, is if I get a book on history, I always go to the back right away to see all of the footnotes and citations and all of that. The thicker it is at the back of the book, the more I have confidence in what it was, because they did so much research. So on these things, I do make it a point to keep the citations and everything that the Catholic site used, and you can get more information for the readings, etc., on every one of these saints. Let's see.
So we got 9 people online. You want to have him give your email address out in case they ask for it?
Yeah, okay.
You know what your email address is?
Sure. If everybody is ready, oh, you're going to just forward it out to them?
Just there's her email address,
Okay,
just so you spell it right.
okay. So if you want any of the information, and like I said, I got a big stack of it. How do I put it up there?
Put it on a Word document, open up Word on your computer.
Oh, yeah. I follow. So, sorry. Yeah, I know. It's a senior moment.
And I'll zoom in on the screen.
Okay. New slide. Okay. T.
You can also do it on PowerPoint slide.
I'm trying to, but it isn't.
PowerPoint's open.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying. Yeah. File open.
New. Do you have dual screen going, or?
Well, I did, yeah, but here we go. I can type. T.
I think he's got dual screen going. Oh,
Yeah, there you go. Okay. All right, you ready? Here you go. There's Teresa's address. Okay. So, yeah, I have a really great 25-page thing on St. Gregory, Pope St. Gregory the Great. I have a really good one on Bede. See if I can get the other one back up. So the first ones I give you is thought I had them. That is the beginning. Okay, hang on. Sorry, guys. Benedict. I got Benedict in there for you. I have St. Francis of Assisi. I have, here we go. Okay, so I have Venerable St. Bede. I have St. Augustine of Kent, which I mentioned. I have Pope St. Leo III. That's only a 3-pager. St. Albertus Magnus. St. Anselm of Canterbury. Benedict of Nursia. Let's see, what else? Catherine of Siena. I get as much information on Catherine of Siena as you can. She's a beautiful, beautiful saint. And it's not just because it's my mom's namesake. But she's incredible. St. Francis of Assisi. And who else do I have? St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay? So I've got a ton of information on the saints. I didn't go into the details about the councils because, to what you said, Tom, it's eye-glossing information. And So I think down the road, it would be nice if we could go over that, but that's a whole other group of classes, okay? So what I'm going to do every week is I'm going to put the packet together of the slide deck and whatever saints and pertinent information that we're going to go over. So I can give you this stuff, read this at your leisure. Well, and there's a lot of information here, but it's very cool. And some of it you won't care about, but some of it you might really get a lot out of. Okay?
It doesn't have to be in color.
No, but my slides are. So when you get the files, they'll be in color. You can do them in black and white. You can do them in color. That's fine.
You should probably figure out a way to just put it on a website or something.
Yeah.
Or
The other,
26 that are not here that aren't, that they can just go through and maybe for next week
Okay.
figure out a place for
so how many do we have online right now?
that. We had over 46 people watch it. We only got nine.
9. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, and like next week, so for next week, we'll probably get out of here a little early this week. For next week, it's gonna be a really interesting class because I'm gonna be going over Christianity and how it was affected by Islam, and also I'm going to go in detail as to just things about Islam itself. If any of you have any information, please bring it to the class and share it. I don't know how we can do it, if we can get a mic to go around, I don't know, but I've got a lot of information in modern Islamic that I've dealt with personally because of traveling over to Saudi. I also did a job in Indonesia, which is 98 to 99% Islamic, and the entire country is the largest Islamic population in the world. So it was very interesting because, believe it or not, in Jakarta, the second largest mosque is right across the street from the second, or one of the largest cathedrals in Asia. And they actually tolerate each other in that part of Jakarta. And during Christmas, the Muslims allow the Christians to use their parking lot. And during Ramadan, the Catholics let them use their parking lot. So they get along, but when you go to, I went to Sumatra where I had to do some work, and they had the militants coming down and attacking any of the Western, there's only like one Western hotel, and it had a bar, so they had to go in there and with AK-47s and take the bar out. So it's really interesting. And when I go into Muhammad and compare some of the things about Islam compared to Christianity, it is kind of interesting that Jesus Christ said, "Follow me and you will have eternal life." Muhammad said, "Follow me or I will kill you." That's a big difference. And when I go into the history of what happened in Mecca and everything else, you'll see that it's pretty ruthless. And then I'll go into the Sunnis and the Shias and how that all split apart, similar to East and West, but it's a lot different, okay? And why it split and why it is still split, and they're at war with each other still to this day. And then I'm going to go through the Crusades. There is quite a few, but the last two are really terrible crusades that didn't go anywhere. One was the Children's Crusade. I won't go into too much about that, but it was really a black eye on the papacy because of it. But we'll go into the things because there's a lot of false stuff out there where it says, well, you know, the Christians were just as bad as Islam. Well, the reason why they started the Crusades was simply because the lands of Christianity were being attacked and people were getting raped and pillaged. And as Augustine said, when your family and everything are being attacked, you have the right to defend. So we'll go into all of that next week, but I think it'll be a really good class, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. And it'd just be good for you to at least get that information, because now when you see stuff going on in the world, it'll make a little more sense. Okay? That's it for tonight.